You know, there's several things that are prerequisites for Windows Virtual Desktop. Chiefest among them are getting your network set up, whether or not you need a VPN or express route, settling in on your identity strategy, how you're going to be using Active Directory. And then you have some of the optional stuff. And one of those is how you're going to manage your images. Now, you can certainly go with the Azure Marketplace image. There are multiple versions of Windows that work with WVD. But beyond that, a lot of customers choose to still create their own custom images. This, of course, has big benefits in something like Windows Virtual Desktop, where you want to pre-package all of your applications into that image along with your updates and configuration settings so that you can deploy new VMs very quickly instead of traditionally patching your VMs. And we've already covered that process in our WVD update management video, which you can check out right up here. So just like you, I update my VMs on a regular basis. So today I thought we'd put all the pieces together. I'll show you the process to create or update your custom image and then roll out those images with our new VMs for this month in Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm Dean Cifola, and this is the Azure Academy. Now, of course, there are many tools that you can use to do this kind of image creation or updating process, and we are definitely not going to be able to cover all of them. But if you've been doing this kind of process around Windows for long enough, I'm sure at some point you've run across the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, or MDT, as well as System Center Configuration Manager. But around here, we focus on what we can do in Azure. So we're going to rely on the native Azure tooling today, and I'll give you some tips and tricks around how we're going to protect that image through the build update process so we don't have any issues, and we can do rollback if we need to. So let's jump right over to the Azure docs and get started. On the main page of our docs, we'll scroll down just a little bit into Windows Virtual Machines. And over in the table of contents, we'll go under How To Guides. And then we'll go to this section on Use Images. And we'll start off with the Image Builder Overview. And over on the right side, we'll go to How It Works because they have some great pictures here. So no matter if you're using ICD, MDT, ConfigMan, Packer, Image Builder, DevOps pipelines, etc., all of them follow this same basic process. We start out with some kind of source, and that would be your initial copy of Windows. Then we do some amount of customizations. We package that for distribution, and then we can start building VMs from it. So we'll scroll back up to the top and click our docs link to go back to the beginning. And then we'll scroll down to Windows Virtual Desktop, go to the How To Guide, and then we'll click on Customize a Session Host Image. We have to first create a virtual machine, and we're going to do this using the Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session image that we'll pull out of the Azure Marketplace, and then we'll customize that image. But if you scroll down just a little bit, there is a section for doing this locally through Hyper-V, and you can read through that section if you need to. Either way, once we're done, we're going to proceed with the customizations, and that's covered here in software preparation. And this could be anything from installing your applications, monitoring tools and agents, to setting your policy settings and those type of things. Go over to the Azure portal and we'll click our plus at the top to get started. And in the search box, I'll just type Windows 10. And the one we want is at the bottom here, Windows 10 plus Office 365. And when we click on that, we have our multi-session image available here in a few different versions. We'll be using the latest version. And we'll hit create, and you've seen us create many VMs in the past, so we'll just zip right through this. And I will be taking most of the defaults, but we'll be putting this into a separate resource group called Custom Image inside the EastUS, and everything looks good and we're ready to create. So now that we've got a VM to work with, the first thing that we need to do before we start customizing this is we need to take a snapshot. Now, of course, the first and biggest benefit of a snapshot is rollback. So if something that we're doing ends up not working out and we corrupt our image, we don't have to start completely from scratch. We can just roll back to our latest version, and then we can keep going from there and avoid the same mistake. We'll go to the VM and then go to disks. Then we'll click on the disk name. We'll hit the create snapshot button. Then we have to store that snapshot somewhere, and I'll store it in the same resource group where my VM is, and then we have to give our snapshot a name. Since I'm rolling this out for next month's VMs, I'm calling it snapshot 05, and this is the first iteration, so this is 05-01. Now we need to decide on a snapshot type. So our choices here are a full snapshot, which will be an actual replica of the disk, or we can take an incremental snapshot. Benefit being, of course, that this is far smaller and then the storage cost will be less. For this particular use case, we're going to take a full snapshot, and it just takes a few seconds longer, but this way we have a total rollback and we don't have to worry about anything with incremental versions. Now for our storage type, we have zone redundant here as default, and we'll be using that. Your other choices are premium SSD and standard HDD. So if you choose premium, you will get a warning here. The cost of premium is higher than a hard drive, and it's recommended for a snapshot that you store it as a hard drive, so it's stored at the lowest cost possible. But we'll choose zone redundant here, which is going to create a standard hard disk drive snapshot and then store it in a zone redundant state. So we'll hit next. So you can change the encryption option if you need to, but all storage in Azure is encrypted by default with a platform managed key. So I'm fine with that. If you need to change that to a customer managed key, then you can do that and then supply the needed information. So I'll click next. We'll add a tag, and now we know who's paying for these resources, what our application is. This is our lab environment, and our specific workload is for Windows Virtual Desktop, and this is related to our images. And we'll hit next, and then we'll hit create. And now back in our resource group, we have a snapshot. So if we click on that just to take a look, we can see what the source image was for our snapshot, what type it is, the fact that it is unattached, and what the size is. So now that we've got that safety net, we're ready to start customizing. So I'll click on my VM, and we'll click the connect button, and we'll get in the system using Azure Bastion. And we've covered how to use Bastion in a previous video, which you can go check out up here. And I'll provide my credentials, and we'll hit connect. And now that we're logged on to our VM, we've got to make a choice, and that is, what customizations are we going to do to this image? Now, if you are making a custom image, chances are you already have a process that you need to follow, and that's exactly what you should do. And so now I've got my Edge installer on my system, along with several other things that I want to use in my image. And we'll walk through each of these rather quickly. And if you have tools like Configuration Manager in your environment, you can set up a distribution point and install all of your software using those tools. And then we come to some of the other items. So we want to install FSLogix, so that's part of our image. Now, when it comes to the customizations around FSLogix, that part is a little more debatable. If you have a single image dedicated to a single host pool, then most likely you're aligning your images based on workloads. If that is the case, then installing FSLogix and adding those registry keys to point it at your particular file share where that workload's users are going to store their images is totally fine. If, however, you're making more of a generic image, then I would leave that part later and either do that by group policy or do it by a custom script extension. Now, this also brings up the Windows Virtual Desktop agent itself. We can certainly add the Virtual Desktop agent. However, that agent gets deployed using a token. So if your plan is to update your image more frequently than when your registration token will expire, then you can put it into your image. But understand, again, you will have that potential risk of your token expiring, then your image deployments will fail. You will also not be able to use that particular image for more than one host pool. My general guidance is to leave it out so that you have more options later. One thing that I do know, however, in my case, is that I will be installing the log analytics agents so that I can do my monitoring. So I'm going to install the MMA agent here, and I'll choose this middle option to connect our agent to Azure Log Analytics and hit next. Now we need our workspace ID and key, which I can get from Azure, my Log Analytics workspace. We go to advanced for this, and I'll copy my workspace ID. So I'm good to go. Yes, I do want to use Microsoft Updates for this. And that'll just take a few seconds to install. While that's going, I'll also install the Service Map Dependency Agent so I can see all the connections from my VM. And I will not restart at this point. We'll do that in a moment. And then I have this folder. This is from the Sepago monitoring solution for Windows Virtual Desktop. And we did cover their solution in our WVD monitoring video, which you can check out up here. So we'll take our zip file here and extract everything. And inside that folder, we just need to edit our config file. And in the config file, we just need to add our customer ID and shared key. And this comes from our Log Analytics workspace. And then I will do a shift right click on this screen so we can open PowerShell right from here. And I'll just run a command to make sure that I can reach my Log Analytics workspace. And the sending test data was successful. So I'm good to actually install the solution now. And that can be done by running the same command with the install parameter. And we're done. And that brings us to some special applications. Back in the Azure docs, we're going to go back to our table of contents and click the next link for Install Office on a master WVD image. And here there's a few different things to point out. Number one, the image that we have selected from Azure already has Office installed. However, if you need to install Office, you need to do so that it's enabled for a shared VM. So if we go down here to the Install Office in a shared computer activation mode, this gives you a description of how to use the Office custom deployment tool. And then a little further down the road here, we have how to do the actual install by running setup with the configuration XML. Here is an example of a configuration XML that will work for you. Now, going a little further down the page, we have the install OneDrive per machine. This is because OneDrive is normally installed per user and we're in a shared environment, so we need it set up per machine. And I have this code already copied to the VM, which will run in PowerShell in just a second. And there's one more item here, and that is Teams and Skype. And this is not yet supported, although support for this is coming. And when you do, you're going to need to install Teams also for machines instead of for users. So here is the Teams document for future reference. Again, not supported at this time. And also the commands here to do the installation for a shared environment. And the first thing that you have to make sure of is that you uninstall the current version of OneDrive. So in your apps and features, just select OneDrive and click uninstall. And I've opened the PowerShell ISE as an administrator. So now I'm going to run this command on line 11 here. This is going to set up OneDrive for our Windows 10 multi-session image. Okay, and now that that is done, we need to run the install of OneDrive and set the flag for all users. And that'll just take a moment to finish. And now that that's done, we'll add these 3 final registry keys. The OneDrive is all ready to go. Let's reboot our VM. And we're back on our VM. So this is the point in the process when we can move on to the system customization. So in our temp drive, I've created a custom MMC snap-in. And from here, you can pretty much edit and customize anything you want. So this brings up a strategy question. Should you implement your systems using group policy or all of these local settings? And my answer is going to be both. Reason why is when you're making a custom image, one of the things that's important is speed to deployment. That's kind of why you're doing this in the first place. So you might as well make all of these settings as much as you can locally inside the image. Then use group policy as a drift control mechanism. And I'm going to start with the computer management and go to the system tools, and then the local users and groups, and finally into groups. And here I'm going to add exclusions for FSLogix for my local administrator because I don't want that user to be using an FSLogix profile. And as far as the includes go, the default is everyone. So now everyone other than my local administrator will be able to use FSLogix. In the Windows firewall, my inbound and outbound settings, the one thing that I want to make sure is enabled is file print share echo request. This is so that ping will work, and I'll make sure that's enabled on the inbound and on outbound, and that all looks good. This is the point also where you can add any certificates that you'll need for your domain environment, or if you're using MSIX app attach and you need a code signing cert. In the local group policy section, I'll go under administrative templates, Windows components, and the file explorer. And the policy I want to set up here is to prevent access to drives from my computer. And the reason for this is in every Azure VM, there is a D drive. This is your temporary storage. And if you click on that, there is a file here that says data loss warning. And this is temporary storage. Anything that you put on here probably will be lost when you reboot the VM. I want to make sure that people don't mistakenly put something on there. So I'm going to restrict access to the D drive. So now when we try to go to the D drive, we will get an error message here telling us that we are restricted. And we've got a few more to add here. So we'll go now to the computer configuration, administrative templates, system, group policy, and then we'll go to configure user group policy loopback processing mode. And we've got two choices here, either merge or replace. So to understand which one of these you should use, let me explain for a second GPOs. Group policy objects is where we have user settings and computer settings. Merge mode will cause the computer settings GPO to have a higher precedence than user settings. Replace mode, the user's GPOs will not even be gathered. Okay, we're just going to go with the computer object settings. So it depends on how you're structuring your GPOs in your environment as to which one you want to pick. In my case, where I've got my WVD VMs, I'm going to set all of my GPOs based on those computer objects, so I'm going to choose replace mode. So any user settings will basically be ignored, and they'll have to live with the settings that I have enforced on my WVD VMs. So I'll click OK to that, and we'll scroll back up here. I'll close the system settings and go under Windows Components. We'll go down to the Remote Desktop Services, and we'll go to the Session Host. First is session timeouts. If a user is idle for too long, we want them to log off because they're obviously not using their session. Think about when people go to lunch. You take a half hour or an hour long break in the middle of the day. Do you want the users to have to log back in when they come back from that break? Then once the user does become disconnected from their session, how long should that session live before we just close that session out? Okay, and you can answer those questions for these particular settings. I'll set my disconnected time for 10 minutes. However, if we're dealing with someone who's just using remote applications, then we can also configure when they close their last remote application, how long do we wait before we log off their session in the background? So I'm going to set that one to 5 minutes. We do have the set timeout for active but idle sessions, like in that lunchtime scenario, and I'll set this one for 30 minutes. And finally, we'll go under connections and we'll open set rules for remote control. Now, this is a general feature of RDS. It's not directly related or enabled in WVD specifically, but this will give me the ability to do session shadowing. And you have multiple options here to either just view the session with or without user's permission and have full control with or without user's permission. Since this is just my lab, I'm going to set it for full control without permission. So that's just some examples of a few things that you can edit in your local group policy. And then of course you can back this up from drift enforcement through your Active Directory group policy. And certainly your settings here should match what's in your Active Directory GPOs. So with that, we'll bring up one final thing, the local security policies setting, and I'll go to password policy. And we want to enforce our password history here to remember the last 10 passwords, set the maximum age of our passwords to be 28 days, and set the minimum length to be 12 characters. Okay, again, just another example, and you can certainly tweak things according to your policies. So we'll give another reboot and then make sure that everything works all over again. So it looks like we can still get in and our VM's in a ready state to be captured. So I've signed out of the VM because before we take our image of the VM, we should take another snapshot just for safety's sake. So our second snapshot is done. What if during any of that process, you locked yourself out of the image, you corrupted it somehow, and things did not go well? We've got our snapshots. How do we restore those and then go back to an earlier form of the image? So at the very top here, we'll click the search bar and type disks. And we'll click on the disks and then we'll click the plus and we're going to put this in the same resource group as our VM. We'll call it snap restore 0501, the same region. And then we have our source type, and this is where the magic happens. We click the drop down and we can choose a snapshot and then click the snapshot drop down and we can select any one of our snapshots that are here. I'll choose our original snapshot so we can see the full rollback, and then we'll click to change our size and we'll restore to the original size that we had of 128 gigabytes. We'll select next. We'll go with the default encryption, use the same tags as before and click next, and we will hit create. So back in our resource group, we now have our VM, the two snapshots, the original disk, and our newly restored disk. How now are we supposed to go about detaching this thing and then attaching the new one? Well, we can click on the VM, go to the disk section, and then we have a button here that'll do this for us. And there is PowerShell code for this as well, but we'll click on the button to swap our OS disk, choose our disk from the dropdown of our snap restore, and then we need to type in the name of our VM to confirm, and then we press OK. Now the first step in the process here is it's going to stop our virtual machine because we can't make changes to it while it is running. And now that that's complete, we're going to swap the OS disk out, and that is complete. So now if we go back to the VM and refresh, we've got our snap restore here instead of our original image. And back in our resource group, we see that both of our disks are still here, so we can go back to that one since we know that it was working. But just for the test's sake, let's start up our VM. Now that our VM's in a running state, let's connect back into it using Bastion. Open our creds and hit connect. And if we open add remove programs, we can see that there are no applications installed. And the same thing for all of our policies around our password history. So this VM has been successfully restored before we did any of that stuff. So we'll swap everything back using the same process. So let me log off. Back in Add Remove Programs, you can see all of our apps are now stored, as well as our security policy settings for our passwords. So this image is ready to go. Now all that's left at this point is we need to run sysprep. So this can be found in the C drive in the Windows System 32 sysprep, and we want to run this as the administrator. And here we'll click the Generalize button, and then we have our shutdown option. Now, because we're running this in Azure, once sysprep completes, we're going to lose connectivity to the box. So I'm going to go with the shutdown option and we'll click OK. And now we'll click the capture button. We'll give our new image a name, and I'll call it WVD05 image. We'll store it in our custom image resource group, and we have checked the box to delete the VM object now that we're done with this particular machine, and we'll hit create. And here we have our completed image. And finally, we want to take this VM image and we want to be able to use it for Windows Virtual Desktop. So at the bottom, we have our resource ID for our image, and we'll copy that and then go to the plus, and we'll type in Windows Virtual Desktop, and we'll select the provision a host pool, and we'll hit create. And I'll skip ahead to the virtual machine settings here, and here's where we'll choose our managed image. We'll put in our custom image name as well as our resource group name where that image is located, and fill out the rest of this as is normal. And I've gone out to my GitHub page, to my Azure WVD repo. We'll go to the WVD templates, new host, and then I've got a deploy to Azure button for my custom template that I use. And this is a great template to use to build out an existing host pool as well. It's already got all the WVD agent and FS Logic stuff built in. I'll click to edit the template, and then I'll go down to my virtual machine. We'll scroll down just a little bit. You can see we have an image reference section. And what this is doing to pull the Windows Server or Windows 10 operating system out of the Azure Marketplace, like we started with originally, and to give you the needed values to make that happen. If we wanted to use our custom template, we'd replace these items out of our image reference section with the ID of our custom image. And we'll click save, and we'll fill out the rest of this information, and we'll scroll down to the bottom, check the box, and hit purchase. And our build was complete, and I've got my remote desktop app here, and I'll just launch the task manager real quick just so we can see that we're logged into our new VM. And I'll use the hostname command and who am I, which will show who we're logged in as. We're definitely logged into WVD to our new VM that we just provisioned, and we can open all of our new apps that I've already shared. There's VLC Player for the first time, the new Edge browser, and we're able to get out to the Azure Academy, run Visual Studio Code. And I can even run something like Notepad++ because I have access to the task manager and the command prompt, even though I didn't share that in the remote desktop application. So just be careful what you share because it may give access to something that you didn't originally intend. So I hope you've enjoyed walking through the process of creating your own custom image and getting that to work with Windows Virtual Desktop. I know this was a little longer than a typical video on the Azure Academy, but I think that it was worth it for this topic. And if you enjoyed it or learned something new, please click that thumbs up and just let us know that you appreciated it. And while you're down there, leave us some comments or questions that you have about doing custom images with WVD or about any other topic you're interested in, especially if you have a suggestion for a future video. We're always looking for more ideas. And please feel free to share this video or anything else on the Azure Academy with anyone else who may be interested. We're just looking to help everybody learn all they can about Azure. And while you're down there, if you want to get an email notifying you when our new videos come out, which is about once a week, you can click the email notification bell as well. And if you're looking for something else, we've got our latest video over here on the top, as well as a video that we picked out just for you over here at the bottom, so you can keep learning about Azure. Thanks for joining us for this video, and we will catch you in the next one. Happy learning.